All right, so today we're diving into a really fascinating puzzle, one that sits right at the heart of American foreign policy. How is it that the most powerful country on earth seems to consistently talk and act like it has no memory of its own history? Let's get into it.
So, this whole thing kicks off with a pretty wild quote from President Joe Biden back in 2021. He's asking, just imagine what it would be like if the US meddled in another country's elections. And what's so striking here is just how innocent the question sounds, especially when you consider that the United States has a very, very long and well documented history of doing exactly that.
But here's the thing. This is nothing new. If you rewind 100 years, you find President Woodrow Wilson saying the Monroe Doctrine was all about peace, even as the U.S. military was literally invading its neighbors in Latin America. The point here is, this isn't about one specific president. It's a pattern that stretches across a century. So the real question has to be, why? Why does this keep happening?
To really get to the bottom of this, the source material we're looking at treats it like an investigation. We're on the hunt for the root cause of this strange presidential amnesia, this century of guilelessness that seems to just permeate American foreign policy talk. Well, our first big clue suggests this isn't just about people forgetting things. No, the source argues this is something much more deliberate. It's an active choice to look away from reality, a process it calls willful unseeing. So what does that mean, willful unseeing? It means actively refusing to acknowledge something that is right there in front of you. Think of it like the elephant in the room. It's not just that people are ignoring it, it's that there's a collective, unspoken agreement to pretend it doesn't exist, even while everyone is carefully stepping around it. But how on earth does an entire generation of policymakers learn to do that? Well, the answer, according to our source, is kinda shocking. It lies in the very foundation of how foreign policy experts are trained to think. To find the why, we have to look at the academic field that shapes their entire worldview. International relations, or IR.
So here's what happened. After World War II, the field of IR basically decided to focus almost entirely on the sovereign state as the main actor on the world stage. Now, that sounds logical, but here's the problem. Imperialism is a whole different beast. It's a type of power that flows across and between states. So by narrowing their focus to only look at state versus state action, scholars basically wrote the entire concept of empire out of their models. It became invisible. And this created a condition that the source calls colonial agnosia. It's this collective inability to even recognize colonialism when it's happening in the present. It lets the experts treat imperialism as something that only happened in the past, something that was a European thing, and something that has absolutely no connection to modern America. So, and this is really important, we are not talking about a few biased individuals. This became a professional standard. A norm against noticing got baked right into the discipline itself. It almost became unprofessional to talk about American imperialism because the very intellectual tools these experts were given were designed to look straight past it. This norm against noticing inevitably leads the conversation down a very specific and very misleading path. Whenever the topic does come up, which is rare, the debate always gets stuck on one question: is the United States an empire? The answer you almost always get from the foreign policy world is a simple, firm no. And with that, the conversation is over. Case closed. Our source has a great name for this, the thingness trap. It's this obsession with a rigid definition. We get stuck asking, is the US this one specific thing we call an empire? Does it look exactly like the Roman Empire or the British Empire? And if it doesn't fit neatly into that historical box, the whole idea gets thrown out. But that completely misses the point. And this is where the source makes a really crucial pivot. We need to stop asking that question and start asking a much, much better one. Instead of asking what the US is, we should be asking what it does. When is the United States acting imperially? You see, that one little shift from identity to behavior, it changes everything. Now, to answer this new, better question, we need a different set of tools. And our source finds them in the work of the legendary cultural critic Edward Said, who gave us a powerful new way to see the world. At its core, Said's method is beautifully simple. You find the thing that has been pushed to the margins, the thing that everyone is leaving out of the conversation, in our case, imperialism, and you deliberately drag it back and put it right in the center of your analysis. You force yourself to look at the very thing everyone's been trained to unsee.
See, this whole method is built on Said's much bigger idea of what imperialism even is. For him, it wasn't just a simple label you could slap on a country. It was a huge, complex system of power, one that operates culturally, politically, and economically, that actively shapes how we see the entire world.
So here's how it works, broken down into 3 easy steps. Step 1, you center what's been ignored. Step 2, you look very closely at the language, the rhetoric that's being used to keep it hidden. And step 3, you connect that hidden history and that specific language to the politics of right now.
Okay, now for the payoff. This is the aha moment. When we apply Saad's method and look back at that century of guilelessness, something remarkable happens. By putting imperialism back at the center of the story, these recurring patterns of political language just snap into focus. The source identifies 2 main rhetorical moves that pop up over and over again to keep this willful unseeing going: deflection and projection.
First up, deflection. This is incredible. Look at the language here. On the left, you have a British imperialist from 1916. He admits to the poison of slavery, but only so he can immediately praise how great Britain was for getting rid of it. Now look at the right. Over a century later, 2 American academics do the exact same thing. They acknowledge past sins only to immediately pivot and celebrate how liberalism is the cure. It's the same rhetorical trick, just 100 years apart.
And then we have the second strategy, projection. In 1918, a defender of the British Empire says, "Germany is an empire, but we are a system of nations." Fast forward to 2022, and a contemporary writer calls Russia's war an imperial conquest, while calling the US a neutral custodian. In both cases, the ugly label of empire is projected onto a rival, which allows you to define your own power as something much nicer.
So why does any of this matter? Well, because the political benefit of these language games is huge. It allows the United States to wield immense global power, to act in ways that are, by any reasonable definition, imperial, while continuing to describe itself and see itself as just a regular liberal democracy.
So, what's the crucial takeaway here? It's that the questions we ask completely shape the answers we can find. Asking, is the US an empire, is a trap. It leads to a dead end. But asking, when does the US act imperially? Well, that's the key. That one simple shift unlocks a whole new way of seeing, and it finally lets us see the patterns of power that were hidden in plain sight all along. And that leaves us with one final big question to think about. If we can adjust our lens, if we can learn to see this one big thing that has been so carefully and deliberately hidden, what else about our world suddenly changes? What other connections, what other truths might suddenly snap into focus?